There is a moment, every now and then in this industry, when you can feel a boundary shifting under your feet. Not the slow grind of incremental improvement, but the sharper, more unsettling sensation that a long-accepted limitation has just been challenged. AST SpaceMobile sits precisely in that uncomfortable, exhilarating space. While everyone else talks about global coverage, AST is trying to build it in the literal sense, panel by panel, satellite by satellite, promising a world where the phone in your pocket no longer cares whether a mast is nearby. It is an idea that sounds like marketing until you see the scale of the hardware and realize they really are attempting to stitch a broadband network across the sky. In an era where connectivity has become as fundamental as clean water or reliable transport, the prospect of removing the final pockets of silence carries weight. Not just technical weight, but geopolitical, commercial, and social. Remote communities, disaster-struck regions, shipping lanes, countryside black spots, mountain passes, the forgotten edges of national infrastructure. All of these become reachable without rebuilding the planet. And any company that can solve that is not just entering a market, but redefining it. Yet, this isn't a story of inevitability. It is a story of ambition pressed hard against physics, finance, and fierce competition. A story where timing matters, execution matters, and the margin for error shrinks as expectations grow. Investors circle, regulators watch, rivals move, and still the satellites must fly. So today on Tech I Spy, we take a closer look at AST SpaceMobile, not as a slogan, but as a business with real strengths, unavoidable weaknesses, vast untapped opportunity, and threats waiting in orbit. This is the company that wants to place your smartphone on speaking terms with space. Whether they can deliver is what we will try to understand. Strength in AST SpaceMobile comes from the sheer scale of its ambition, because very few companies in the telecom or aerospace sectors are attempting anything quite so direct or so technically unforgiving. This is not a plan to enhance existing networks or lease bandwidth through middlemen. This is a plan to build the first space-based cellular broadband network designed to speak to an ordinary smartphone as if it were just another tower. That alone places AST in a rare category of firms aiming not to improve the system, but to replace the parts of it the world has always accepted as inevitable. You see that clarity of purpose reflected in the hardware itself. The enormous Blue Walker and Bluebird arrays are not symbolic gestures. They are functional, carefully engineered surfaces designed to generate enough power and enough signal gain to make the impossible suddenly plausible. Another strength lies in the company's growing set of partnerships with terrestrial carriers. When household name operators agree to participate or integrate, it signals something more significant than a future contract. It signals belief. These carriers do not align themselves with unstable science projects. They align with technologies they think will protect or expand their footprint over the next decade. For AST, each carrier relationship is a validation of the core premise that there is commercial appetite for global coverage without building global infrastructure. It also means the company is not trying to conjure a user base out of thin air. They are integrating into systems that already serve hundreds of millions of devices. There is also strength in timing. As terrestrial networks approach physical saturation in developed regions, new growth does not come from building yet another mast, but from connecting the people and places that lie outside profitable reach. Remote villages, maritime corridors, deserts, open countryside, travel routes, borderlands. AST sits precisely at that junction where demand increases but terrestrial expansion becomes economically irrational. The company's proposition feels less like an optional upgrade and more like the next logical step for nations and carriers that want total coverage without total spending. And finally, AST benefits from being seen as a frontier company at a moment when investors are once again rewarding firms that blend aerospace engineering with practical mass-market utility. This is not pure exploration. This is a product with a clear customer, a clear pain point, and a clear roadmap, even if the execution challenges are steep. In a sector filled with constellations that compete for specialist terminals, AST's insistence on connecting the phone already in your pocket gives them a unique strategic advantage. It lowers the barrier to adoption, simplifies the business model, and frames the entire project as an upgrade to everyday life rather than a niche service for enthusiasts. Weakness for AST SpaceMobile begins with the unavoidable physics of what they are trying to build. Connecting a standard smartphone to a satellite in low Earth orbit is not a gentle engineering challenge. It demands enormous antenna surfaces, precise pointing accuracy, relentless power management, and a tolerance for signal conditions that change by the second as the satellite races overhead. Every part of this system must operate perfectly for the connection to feel ordinary, yet perfection in orbit is expensive and fragile. The scale of the hardware, while impressive, also raises questions. Large, deployable structures bring risks during launch and unfurling, and each failure would be catastrophic, not just financially but reputationally. When a company promises global reach, even a single failed deployment becomes a global story. There is also a weakness in the company's financial structure. AST is operating in a sector where burn rate is measured in millions per month, yet revenue remains modest and uneven. Much of the company's valuation is built upon anticipated future cash flows rather than present performance. That gap creates vulnerability. To maintain momentum, more satellites must be manufactured, launched, and maintained, which requires capital at a scale that only a few firms in the world can secure reliably. Funding rounds, debt, and potential dilution hover in the background as permanent companions. Any disruption to financing, global markets, launch schedules, or carrier partnerships could introduce dangerous delays. Another weakness lies in the dependency on external partners. AST is not in control of every step of its own destiny. They rely on launch services, regulatory approvals across multiple continents, coordination with carriers, frequency permissions, and cooperation with national space agencies. A slip in any of these areas can delay entire phases of deployment. And because competitors are watching closely, every delay becomes an opportunity for someone else to demonstrate similar capabilities or to secure the next major carrier before AST can. When your vision requires a global chain of aligned interests, even one weak link matters. Market perception is a subtler weakness, but a real one. AST sits in a volatile category. Ambitious space companies with long horizons and steep upfront costs. Investors in this space are patient only until they are not. A single quarter of slower than expected progress, a postponed launch, or a cautionary comment from a partner can send the share price into violent motion. Volatility feeds more volatility, and volatility breeds narratives that distract from the mission. Once expectations outrun execution, sentiment becomes a liability. And AST, by the nature of its boldness, lives permanently on that edge. Finally, there is the weakness inherent in being first. Pioneers face problems no one has solved before. They write the rulebook while running the race. Every structural, electrical, thermal, orbital, or integration issue that emerges must be solved internally before the network can expand. In contrast, competitors can quietly study these difficulties and design around them. Being first provides attention, but it also provides free lessons to the second mover with deeper pockets. Opportunity is where AST SpaceMobile begins to look less like a speculative engineering experiment and more like a company standing at the threshold of an entirely new category of global infrastructure. The most obvious opportunity is sheer addressable market. Billions of smartphones already exist. Hundreds of millions operate on the fringes of connectivity. And every year, more devices, vehicles, sensors, and systems demand uninterrupted coverage. AST is not trying to persuade the world to adopt a new standard of hardware. The world already carries the hardware. That creates a path to adoption that is unusually clean. Instead of persuading people to buy a dish, a terminal, or a specialized handset, AST is positioning itself as an invisible upgrade layered onto behavior that already exists. Another opportunity emerges in the growing recognition that terrestrial networks are reaching their limits in rural and harsh terrain regions. Governments know this. Carriers know this. International regulators know this. The cost of building masts into remote landscapes often exceeds the revenue they will generate. Yet the pressure to deliver universal coverage intensifies every year as national strategies evolve around digital mobility, remote education, rural equity, emergency communications, and cross-border transport. AST can step directly into this gap by offering a service cheaper than building infrastructure and more reliable than leaving these regions to fend for themselves. In policy terms alone, that is powerful leverage. There is also the opportunity created by climate-related disasters and conflict zones, where infrastructure can be damaged faster than it can be repaired. Direct-to-device satellite communication offers something uniquely valuable: resilience. A network that cannot be toppled by wind or water or fire or sabotage instantly gains relevance for emergency responders, humanitarian agencies, and national security planners. AST, if it proves dependable at scale, could become the default backbone for temporary connectivity in the aftermath of crisis. That is not niche work. That is a global necessity, especially as climate volatility accelerates. Commercially, a more subtle opportunity lies in partnerships. Every carrier that signs up brings not only a subscriber base, but political influence, lobbying power, spectrum understanding, and pre-existing billing relationships. These partners effectively reduce AST's customer acquisition cost to near zero. They turn AST into a wholesale supplier of coverage rather than a consumer-facing challenger. If AST can continue to convert this interest into fully structured commercial agreements, the company can scale without the overhead typically associated with global expansion. Competition itself also creates opportunity. As rival constellations focus on specialized terminals, aviation, shipping, high-bandwidth home internet, and military customers, AST occupies a completely different lane. By committing to the ordinary smartphone, they compete where others are not yet optimized. That gives them a chance to carve out a unique identity before the broader industry begins to pivot. And perhaps the largest opportunity sits in the long-term evolution of the network. Once enough satellites are in place, coverage becomes something greater than mobile reception. It can become a backbone for connected vehicles, autonomous machinery, logistics corridors, agricultural automation, and IoT networks that simply cannot tolerate dead zones. At that point, AST is no longer solving a consumer convenience issue. It is solving an economic one. A world without coverage gaps is a world where logistics, commerce, and safety operate on smoother rails. Threats gather around AST SpaceMobile not because the idea is weak, but because the idea is valuable. And valuable ideas attract competitors, regulators, and geopolitical shadows. The first and most immediate threat is competition from incumbents who do not intend to let a newcomer rewrite the rules. SpaceX sits at the center of this gravitational field. Starlink has more satellites, more launch capacity, more capital access, and a habit of moving with a velocity that leaves entire industries scrambling to react. If SpaceX decides to lean aggressively into direct-to-device connectivity, the weight of its infrastructure could grind down any early lead AST hopes to build. Even a partial overlap in capability could push carriers to hedge or to wait, and hesitation is lethal in a race against the burn rate. Regulation is another threat. And unlike competition, it does not negotiate. AST's vision depends on spectrum agreements, international coordination, orbital permissions, and compliance with rules that vary not just by country, but by agency, by political cycle, and sometimes by individual case officer. A delay in one region can stall commercial rollout. A legal challenge in another can lock spectrum into courtrooms for years. And unlike terrestrial towers, satellites cannot simply be adjusted once launched. Any shift demanded by regulators becomes costly and slow, and any misstep becomes permanent. There is also the threat hidden in capital markets. High-ambition aerospace firms walk a financial tightrope, where investment must arrive in a steady rhythm, never too late, never too small, and never at terms that strangle the ability to scale. AST's valuation relies heavily on future performance, and markets can turn cruel quickly. A global downturn, a risk-off rotation, or a shift in investor appetite could tighten capital at precisely the moment the constellation needs to expand. If the company is forced to raise money under pressure, dilution becomes a real threat, reducing the very shareholder confidence needed to sustain momentum. Technical fragility cannot be ignored. Every hardware deployment carries risk, and AST's satellites are large, complex, and mechanically intricate. A single cascading failure, a misfire during deployment, a thermal imbalance, a structural issue, an unforeseen resonance can undermine investor belief in the entire system. Worse still, space is becoming crowded. Orbital debris grows every year, raising collision risks and generating the constant background anxiety that even flawless engineering can be undone by a silent, tumbling fragment of metal the size of a coin. Finally, there is a threat embedded in customer psychology. Carriers may admire the concept, but they also fear uncertainty. They want reliability, predictable timelines, predictable costs, predictable integration steps. AST must convince them that direct-to-device satellite service will be not only groundbreaking, but dependable. If early performance fails to meet expectations, carriers could slow adoption, explore alternatives, or simply wait for a larger player to deliver a more polished version. And in a business where momentum is everything, hesitation from carriers can bleed into hesitation from investors. And that chain reaction can be fatal. In the end, AST SpaceMobile stands as one of those companies where the verdict cannot be simplified into a neat label. It lives in the tension between brilliance and vulnerability, where the engineering is bold enough to inspire and the execution is fragile enough to worry even the most enthusiastic supporter. What cannot be denied is the potential. A world where every smartphone can whisper directly into orbit is a world with fewer blind spots, fewer dead zones, fewer moments when distance becomes an obstacle. It is a world where coverage becomes an expectation rather than a luxury. AST is trying to drag that world into reality, piece by piece, even as the forces around it test every inch of its resolve. The question is not whether the vision is valuable. It is whether the company can deliver it before someone else does, or before the weight of physics, regulation, and capital slows the momentum. That is the frontier AST occupies, a frontier where enormous opportunity sits on one side and equally enormous risk sits on the other. For investors, analysts, and anyone interested in the future of global connectivity, AST is impossible to ignore. It might succeed spectacularly. It might struggle, but it will not be boring. And that brings us to the end of today's deep dive. If you found this analysis useful, insightful, or even just intriguing, consider checking out the full episode on the channel. And as always, thank you for watching Tech I Spy. Your time, your curiosity, and your support keep this series alive. I'll see you in the next one.